r/2x chromosomes. Driving an Astrovan says, I thought that moving overseas would be amazing. Turns out, I want to go home lol. I planned on moving for about a year. I really thought it would be amazing, and it'd everything I had ever dreamed it would be. So, I spent the last year fantasizing about this move, the new places, the old buildings and the traveling. Well, I moved to the UK 2 months ago and turns out, is not at all what I expected. For a while, I think I subconsciously let the news and social media mold some of my thinking about the US. Though the US has its own problems, it's actually a pretty, great place to live. I come from a third world country myself, and I moved to the States at the young age of 16, and had been living there for 18 years. I consider it my second home. When I moved to the UK, it was exciting, but more than anything, it just didn't feel like home. Everything closes super early, and some places are like ghost towns on Sundays. Most of everything is close by 5 every day. There's no parking spots anywhere. The streets are super small and barely fit one car, let alone two-way traffic. The utilities are very expensive. The houses are so small, my driveway can't even fit my car. I have to park on the street, if I'm lucky to even find a spot to park. Amazon is way expensive and takes forever to arrive. The food is bland, except maybe the blend with Indian food. There's little diversity. The traffic laws are bizarre. The 5-lane roundabouts can get gnarly. It's so cold and apparently it gets dark by 3 during winter. There's no proper lighting on the streets. The roads are full of holes and uneven. There are even red lights at pedestrian crossings that apparently don't apply to you, even though they are right in front of you as you're approaching the pedestrian lines. The bureaucracy is terrible here, so slow, etc. The ability to travel for cheap is wonderful. The history is very cool. Experiencing a new place and way of life is also cool, but I feel somewhat miserable. I moved here due to a job, but I'm counting down the days until my contract is over, so I can go back home. All I wanted to say is that despite the problems back in the US, I miss it a lot. The US is home for me. It will always be home, and I'm forever thankful that I'm able to go back. The US is a wonderful logistics machine. We have a variety of foods and cultures that it's hard to match anywhere else. Bureaucracy is slow everywhere, but man, we are way faster than here, and my original home country. I assume I will get used to living here in the next few months, but I still can't wait to go back home. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Tom Hoyce Contrary says, I notice that of the 17 distinct problems you mention, 7 are about driving. The US is an exceptionally car-centric country. The UK is much less so. If you try to use a car in the UK the same way you do in the US, you will have a bad time. You may find your life is improved by re-evaluating your approach here. Loch Ness Monster says, yup, I came to say this. A Nick resident would be more used to the EU lifestyle than most other Americans. Imapatrox says, this comment made me chuckle, because I read Op's post and thought my friend who was born and raised in the US, and her husband whose family has lived many generations in the US, both moved to the UK 2 years ago, and say it's the best decision they've ever made. Maybe it just depends what the person's priorities are. Then I saw your comment, and yes, my friend is born and raised in Nick, though her husband is from the suburban Midwest, but he loves his life in the UK much more than in the US as well. Jurassica94 says, haha, a lot of the things you mention as negatives are exactly what I love. I'm 30 and never owned a car, because I didn't need one. I love the car-free cobblestone mazes that a lot of old towns are and hate big, car-dependent suburbias. They just seem really soulless to me, same as parking lots. It depends a lot on what you're used to, I guess, but there are absolutely benefits to less car-centric urban planning, and lots of people here love it. Driving an Astrovan says, if I could get away with not driving a car, I would. In my original home country there's a lot of public trans, and I would rather take it than drive a car, most especially here. But where I live, the public trans is lacking, and I'm forced to have a car if I want to make it anywhere. Open bracket. Ambry says, as a Brit who has lived abroad and is now in the UK, it sounds like an issue with where you live. I grew up in a small town and you couldn't pay me to move back. It had the issues you describe. I live in Bristol and have lived in Edinburgh, Glasgow, and London, and they're all great with a lot to do, good food, good transport, aside from Bristol, so didn't need a car. Nuth says, I think it can take 6 months to start to get settled into a new place, and up to a year to start to get used to its quirks. Where in the UK did you move to? Because it can make a huge difference if you are in central London, Manchester / another large city, or in a smaller town suburbia. Also 2 months seems like barely any time to make friends, and having friends in a place makes it feel more like home. I agree our roads and public services are in bad shape due to 15 years of systematic underfunding, and having family in Australia come back and complain about Sundays. I understand where you are coming from, though trust me, it's even more dead in France on Sundays. I guess we tend to see out friends more on Sundays, or just catch up on life admin. Turtless Ruckle says, I'm also an American that relocated to the UK 2 years ago, and I think you're pretty spot on. It took me and my husband a long time to adjust and make good friends. 2 months is nothing to adjust to an entirely new culture. But honestly, a lot of the negatives in the op are not things I've experienced here. It really depends where you are in the UK. I live in Birmingham and we have an insane amount of diversity, good food, things to do all the time, and I personally find parking really easy, since everyone here parks literally anywhere they want. Lol. r/2XChromosomes. Charlibo says, large men always chose to sit next to me on public transport, and I hate it. I'm quite a small woman, just over 5 foot. I've had an annoyingly high number of experiences with huge men choosing to sit next to me. I understand that they probably want the extra space, but they encroach on my own space. Because they are so large, usually over 6 foot at least, they push me into the window. I always sit in the window. I just spent 3 hours being bodily intimidated by a 40 plus 6'ft 20 stone man leaning into my space with his widespread legs, his widespread arms and elbows in my face. I honestly wanted to cry because I felt so trapped. He didn't do anything wrong as such, but why always me? Jonda 649 says, I get that the window has its perks, but if you sit on the aisle side you'll have more freedom. Tawny She-Wolf says, sit on the aisle so they can't trap you. Offer them the window seat if they motion that they want to sit down. Meek says, I never sit in the window seat. A few times in my life I've had men very deliberately trap me in that seat. I just do not use it 99% of the time if I'm traveling alone. People doing this because it's rational for them is uncomfortable for me, so it's just not the place to be if you're a single rider. I'll be a jerk and take the aisle sometimes and stand up to let someone else take the window. Only other smaller people will usually choose to do that, but mostly I favor seats that face out. Yeah, Stupid Bench says, a trick I learned from a friend in college is to carry a shopping bag with a maxi pad box plainly visible in the top. Doesn't need to actually have pads in it, of course. She puts her lunch in it. Put it in the seat next to you. When a man comes over, he'll look down at the seat and sometimes just seeing the box puts him off. If not, and he motions like he wants to sit there, you act embarrassed and move the bag and say something like, oh, let me get that out of your way. Then look at the bag and stop for a second, look at the box, look up at him, look back at the box and say, oh, I hadn't realized. As you move it. Then continue to act embarrassed and awkward and explain. I have to get the biggest pads because I get a really heavy period. I don't know why. Maybe my uterine lining is just thicker or something. I tried to use a menstrual cup, but it leaked, and maybe I just did it wrong. There was blood everywhere, and period blood sometimes has lots of ropey mucus in it which is sticky, and it was such a mess. Men don't like to hear about periods. He'll lean away from you. And the next time he sees a shopping bag with maxi pads on top, he'll sit somewhere else. Methertemporary 903 says, I get why this is annoying and frustrating to you, but if as you say they're not doing anything wrong, just sitting next to you and being big at the same time, what's stopping you from just getting up and moving to a different seat, even if it's an aisle? It kind of makes sense why they choose to sit next to you. It's not like they can sit next to someone as big as themselves, is it? Elitus says, it's not because they were large. It's because they didn't care about other people. Froggy Blue says, if there are other completely empty seats available, this isn't reasonable, and I feel no compunction about putting my bag on the seat next to me. If there's nowhere else available, it wouldn't be reasonable for them not to sit next to you, but it's also not unreasonable for you to ask them to try and keep themselves somewhat contained. I recommend a firm but polite tone, loud enough that others around you can hear. Basically, you want a tone that says I'm not starting shit, but I'm also not taking shit, not yelling but loud enough that any retaliation would be noticed. Obviously you will need to make your own judgment on how safe this is in your situation/area. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe.